Hello, and welcome to my Apex Hour session on Salesforce Consent Management. My name is Elliot Harper, and I've been working with Salesforce Marketing Cloud for almost a decade now. I've written books on Marketing Cloud, and I'm very active in the user community, and I'm also a Salesforce MVP. Now, over the past 12 months, I've spent a considerable amount of time working very closely with privacy and data management, designing architectural patterns, and enabling customers to comply with new and emerging data privacy regulations. In this session, we'll be covering the following topics. Well, let's begin. We provide our consent every day, often without second thought. Now, we've adapted to automatically clicking through those distracting accept buttons on website pop-ups or those obligatory checkboxes when completing various web forms. No matter what the activity is, it seems there's always a requirement to consent to something. But what's up with all those annoying pop-ups and checkbox fields? Well, the regulatory landscape is on the move. What started with a General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR in Europe, is now rippling across continents. Recent regulations include the CCPA in California and the LGPD in Brazil. Then there's India's upcoming Personal Data Protection Bill, or PDPB, which is set to be one of the most strictest and most comprehensive data privacy laws globally. And this is just the beginning. We should anticipate similar regulations popping up for years to come. While these current emerging data protection regulations may vary, one common trait they all share is their primary aim, which is to give individuals control over their personal data while also requiring organizations to establish a legal basis for processing such data. Determining a legal basis for processing data is key. As all these regulations state, the data can only be processed if there's at least one legal basis for doing so. And while legal bases vary by regulation, one common basis that's shared across all regulations is consent, and consent is always required for marketing. Now, many of you may be wondering, but what if I already have a preference center? There's often ambiguity on the differences between capturing consent and the role of email preference centers. Some assume that the role of a preference center is consent management, but it's not. Consent management and preference management serve different purposes. Consent management determines which individuals provided consent, why they did, via which channel, and what they actually consented to. On the other hand, preference management enables individuals to choose their preferred communication frequency, interests, and alternative options to unsubscribing. However, while consent and preference management differ by function, both support each other. Individuals have a right to revoke their consent at any time, and a preference center is a common channel for individuals to exercise this right. As a result, preference management needs to be tightly coupled to consent management. Now, Salesforce has been thinking about consent management for some time. Over the past few years, Salesforce has quietly phased in new storage objects that have come together to form a comprehensive canonical data model that manages all aspects of an individual's consent. Back in the Spring 18 release, we first saw the introduction of the individual object, which has since been complemented with several other consent-related objects from the Spring 19 release right up until the current release. These consent management objects are now available across all Salesforce editions and provide a highly normalized data structure that accommodates the many aspects of privacy and consent management of an individual, while also enabling organizations to align with current and emerging regulatory environments. Probably the most significant aspects of these objects is that, unlike most other standard Salesforce objects, they don't count towards storage. Now, this is a highly unusual and somewhat radical direction for Salesforce, as their licensing model has always been based, in part, on storage, where an individual record accounts for 2 to 8 kilobytes of storage resources, depending on the object type. These consent management objects have been designed with privacy in mind. The object model closely aligns to privacy by design principles. Specifically, at a holistic level, it provides a proactive data model. So rather than waiting for privacy risks to occur, it prevents them from occurring in the first place through an organized and standardized set of objects that align tightly to the properties of real-world entities. Additionally, the data model provides an architectural pattern for organizations to embed privacy into the design and architecture of their IT systems and business processes, rather than bolted on as an afterthought. As a result, privacy becomes an integral component of the data model without diminishing functionality. The following diagram illustrates all currently available consent management objects and their relationships. The objects colored in orange keep track of data related to authorization forms, such as terms of service, privacy policies, and other consent forms. Each authorization form object stores different data, and you can use them together to create a full picture of an individual's consent to the authorization form. The objects in purple are for storing and managing data related to communication subscriptions, such as newsletters or announcements. Different communication subscription objects store different data, such as how the customer consented to the communication subscription and preferred contact timing. And the objects in gray are used to store general consent data, including the legal basis for contacting someone, the channel used to contact them, and the information related to an individual's consent. The Salesforce Consent Management Object Model broadly classifies consent across 4 different levels, which can be summarized as who provided consent, which channels they consented to being contacted on, via which channel address, and what type of consent they consented to. Each of these different levels uses related consent management objects in Salesforce to manage and store consent-related data. Let me now explain each level in turn. This initial level establishes who the person is and determines what they have consented to at the broadest level. And it stores this consent data in the individual object, where an individual can either be a lead, a contact, a user, a person account record, or any permutation of these object types, or none of them. Now, the intent of the individual object is to abstract privacy data from the lead, contact, user, or person account at a record level, and specifically capture the privacy don'ts for an individual, which include don't process personal data, which includes collecting, storing, and sharing personal data, don't solicit products and services, don't profile or process data for predicting personal attributes such as interests, behavior, and location, and don't track website session activity and email engagement such as email opens and clicks. Additionally, the individual object also provides an individuals the ability to exercise their right to be forgotten through a forget this individual field, and their right to access their personal data through an export individuals data field. This next level determines which channels the individual wants to be contacted through. The contact point type consent object defines the named channels, for example, phone or email, and the related opt-in status of an individual for each corresponding channel. An entity relationship exists with this object and the contact point email and contact point phone objects, which both define what time and in which time zone an individual prefers to be contacted. Additionally, the contact point type consent object always references the data use purpose object, which is the reason for contacting an individual, and the data use legal basis object, which is the legal basis for contacting an individual. This third level identifies the specific address or addresses the individual wants to be contacted on. The contact point address object is used to store different addresses for an individual. For example, an individual may have both an office address and a home mailing address. The contact point consent object represents an individual's consent to be contacted via a specific contact point, such as an email address or phone number. And similar to the contact point type consent object, the contact point consent is also tied to the data use purpose and data use legal basis objects. This final level defines what type of content the individual consents to and by which channel. The communication subscription object defines the different communication types, for example, newsletter or announcements, which is a relationship to the communication subscription consent object that tracks an individual's consent against their subscription. Additionally, the communication subscription channel type object defines the engagement channel used to contact the individual for each subscription. Like levels 2 and 3, it's also tied to the data use purpose and data use legal base objects. Now let's talk about the consent event stream. So what is this consent event stream? Well, this is a relatively new feature which was included in the Winter 21 release. This feature uses change data capture on all consent management objects, enabling external systems to subscribe to streaming events which are published when changes occur on any consent management objects. Now, if you're familiar with the streaming API, then you'll now be able to leverage and monitor changes made to consent objects. This event stream aggregates all notifications from objects into a single event stream, which means that you have to pass the returns for particular updates you're looking for, like updates to individual objects. Now, the benefit of doing this is that it provides real-time feed of consent data to external platforms. So organizations can be aware of when a consent event occurs, and this could trigger a process. For example, purging customer data when an individual exercises their right to be forgotten. Now let's talk about the consent APIs. So while Salesforce already offers a comprehensive SOAP and REST API for interacting with objects, the Salesforce Consent API provides the ability to either read and write consent settings. Firstly, let's talk about the Consent Read API. So this API enables you to read consent settings for the lead, contact, user, and person account or individual object records. This API returns aggregated consent data based on an action or actions. For example, email, track, or perhaps should forget. In turn, the Consent Read API provides a convenient method for aggregating and resolving consent data for an individual, without the need to invoke multiple API calls or traverse across complex object relationships. As a result, digital marketing platforms can leverage this API to determine if an individual has consented to receiving communications, and for what specific purpose. And new to the Spring 21 release, the Consent Write API enables users to make a patch request and simultaneously update or write consent data for records that have a lookup relationship or share an email address. So if you use Customer 360 Audiences, which is a new CDP platform recently released by Salesforce, then this API enables you to automatically create an individual record and connect multiple related records to it. Well, thank you for watching my presentation on Salesforce Consent Management. I've covered a lot of ground, but I hope you now have a better understanding of why consent management is important, considering the emerging regulatory landscape, and how to use Salesforce's consent management canonical data model to manage an individual's consent, while also complying to data privacy regulations. Don't forget to check out apexhours.com, where you can register for upcoming Salesforce community events. And also don't forget to subscribe to the Apex Hours YouTube channel, where you can catch up on previous sessions. Thanks for watching.